My best friend spent 13 years destroying himself with heroin, and the night he finally got out of rehab, I knew I was done with him forever.
We were mirrors, him and me. Same grade school, same jobs, apartments right next door. We liked the same girls, same music, same stupid jokes that made our stomachs hurt from laughing. His family was my family, and my family was his. I knew the sound of his knock-heavy, confident. The kind of knock that came from hands that could crush a walnut shell between their palms. I'd seen him do it once at a party, just to prove a point. Those hands, then S showed up. I didn't like him from the start. He talked too fast and laughed too slow, like he was always waiting for the punchline to land. I figured he'd vanish as quick as he appeared. For me, he did. But he became a constant. Texts at midnight, trips to bars I'd never heard of. I didn't think much of it at first. People drift, I told myself. We were grown men, not kids. But then something changed. I started missing work. Then he stopped coming home for days. I'd see his parking spot empty, the same spot that had held his car for 7 years. His family would knock on my door, worried. "Have you seen him?" I'd shake my head, say I hadn't. When his car finally reappeared, he'd wave it off. Me and S were camping in the mountains, doing plumbing work for people with cabins. I wanted to believe him, so I did, until he lost his job. Then came the knock I'll never forget. It was softer, hesitant. I opened the door, and for a second I didn't recognize him. The man standing there was thin, like someone had taken a knife and shaved off layers I'd never even known were there. His eyes were different, too distant, swimming. He asked if he could have dinner because he was broke. "No problem, bro," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. I watched him eat, those walnut-crushing hands wrapped around a fork like it weighed 20 pounds. That was the beginning. Suboxone, he said, then heroin. 13 years. Off and on. I was always there, not enabling, but there. I drove him to meetings when he asked. I sat with his mother when she cried. I watched him get 6 years of sobriety. Watched him rebuild himself into someone I recognized again. I let myself breathe, but then something changed again. He became distant. The calls got shorter. I'd see his girlfriend's car in his spot more often, and I knew what that meant. She was an enabler kind who thought love meant never saying no. I don't blame her for his addiction, but I know the difference between a lifeline and an anchor. Last year, he was arrested. 4 months in jail, 5 months in a rehab facility. Court-ordered therapy, a parole officer, the whole structure that felt like scaffolding around a collapsing building. When he called me on his way home, his voice was clear. "I'm getting out. I'm leaving her. I'm finding a job. I'm finally gonna do it right." I heard the hope in his voice, and for the first time in more than a decade, I let myself believe it. S was dead by then, over to CISO, that poison was gone. It was just my best friend coming back. Then came the night. My phone rang around 10. I saw his name and smiled, ready to hear about his first day of freedom. But the background noise was ronk-clinking glasses, a jukebox, voices layered and loud. "You at the fucking bar?" I said. "Please tell me you aren't drinking." He laughed, a wet, loose laugh I hadn't heard in years. "Me and the girl, we talked. We're staying together, celebrating, new start." In the background, I heard her voice, high and bright, ordering another round. I hung up. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just pressed the red button and set the phone on the counter and stood there in my kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum. The next morning, he called again. I picked up. He sounded hungover but unrepentant. "We decided to stay together," he said, like it was the most obvious decision in the world. "We went to the bar to celebrate." "What's the big deal? What's the big deal?" Those 3 words landed in my chest like stones. I didn't answer. I told him I had to go. That was 10 months ago. June. I remember because the air was thick and the days were long, and I spent them trying to feel something. But the calls kept coming. Text messages, voicemails I never returned. He'd tell me about his therapy sessions, about his girlfriend, about how things were getting better. I'd listen to the messages with the phone against my ear, and I'd feel nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief, nothing. It's a strange thing to watch a person you loved like a brother turn into a notification on your screen. I scroll past his name now. I don't open the messages. I don't call back. I've become the friend who used to answer every knock, now standing behind a closed door, pretending him not home. I know what people will say. They'll say addiction is a disease and he's sick, and a real friend doesn't abandon someone who's sick. They'll say I should be there even when it hurts, even when it's the 10th time, the 50th time, the 100th time. They'll say love means staying. But I've already stayed. I stayed for 13 years. I stayed through the lies, the thin hands, the missing holidays, the calls from his mother. I stayed through the 6 years he was sober, and the 7 years he wasn't. I stayed through the arrest, and the rehab, and the hope that felt like a fool's game. And then, 10 months ago, I stayed on the phone for 3 seconds after he told me he was celebrating his freedom with the woman who helped chain him to his addiction. 3 seconds, and then I hung up. Now I get his messages. They pile up like leaves I don't bother to rake. He asks how I am. He tells me he misses me. He says he's doing better. Maybe he is. Maybe this time it's real. But I don't check anymore. I don't want to know, because the truth is I don't care. That word carrot used to live in my chest like a second heart. I felt everything he felt. His highs were my highs. His falls knocked the wind out of me. But somewhere along the way, the muscle wore out. Or maybe it just learned to stop beating for him. I see his name on my phone, and I think of the knock I used to know heavy, confident. I think of walnut shells crushed in a palm. I think of dinners made, doors left unlocked, years given like they were endless. And then I put the phone down and go back to my life. He's not in it anymore. And the worst part that keeps me up some nights is that I'm okay with that. I'm more than okay. I'm relieved. So here's the question I can't answer. The one that loops in my head when I'm trying to sleep. When does a person's moral obligation to support a lifelong friend through addiction end? And if you walk away after 13 years of watching someone burn every chance you give them, does that make you a monster? Or does it just make you tired? I don't know. All I know is that my best friend spent 13 years destroying himself with heroin. And the night he finally got out of rehab, I knew I was done with him forever. Hello, I'm Dr. Julian Reed. Let's speak plainly about S. In most addiction narratives, we search for a villain someone who slipped the first pill, who normalized the needle. S fits that silhouette, but clinically, he represents something more insidious, the proximal catalyst. He didn't create a susceptibility to dependency, but he provided the architecture for it to flourish. What we see in S is what I term addiction as parasitic triangulation. He inserted himself into an airtight dyad men who were, in the narrator's words, exact mirror sand slowly siphoned out of that structure. S offered a what the stable friendship could not unregulated escape, the thrill of disappearance. A relationship built on absence rather than presence. Notice that S himself had no staying power with the narrator. He vanished, but his function was to normalize the pattern of vanishing, to make absence feel like adventure rather than abandonment. SS death by overdose is almost narratively convenient, but clinically, it tells us he was never a master manipulator, was another casualty of the same gravitational pull. Someone who likely introduced what he himself could not control. He wasn't a kingpin, he was a vector. Now, the narrator has spent 13 years holding the space S helped hollow out. And what's striking is the narrator's emotional architecture. He describes himself as supportive, never enabling. That is a razor's edge to walk for over a decade. It requires constant calibration, constant suppression of the impulse to rescue or to rage. The human psyche is not designed to sustain that vigilance indefinitely. What we're seeing in the narrator's final admission, I don't care, is not cruelty. It is the natural consequence of compassion without reciprocity. The mirror has cracked because only one person was still looking into it. A, for his part, has engaged in what we call cyclical self-sabotage with external attribution. He exits rehab, makes grand declarations of independence from the enabling girlfriend, and within hours he is drunk with her at a bar, celebrating. This isn't mere relapse. This is a ritual reenactment of his own collapse, performed almost immediately after the scaffolding of sobriety was erected. He needed the narrator to witness it. He called. He wanted an audience, and that is the dark heart of this dynamic. The narrator's burnout isn't just fatiguates the recognition that his role has never been to help a recover. His role has been to watch, to bear witness to the self-destruction, and at some point, the witness must decide whether continuing to watch is an act of loyalty or an act of complicity. So here is the moral ambiguity I leave you with when a person spends 13 years casting themselves as the supporting character in someone else's tragedy. At what point does stepping off the stage become self-preservation rather than abandonment? And if the person you're leaving behind keeps choosing the script that destroys them, are you obligated to keep holding the lights?